Hi, this is Misha, and I've already done kind of a generic overview and thoughts video on UFOs, and a little bit into the whole alien thing. I'm sure you noticed in that video, I definitely skimmed over the whole Roswell incident. That's because I wanted to give it its own video. One way or the other, it deserves it. And one way or the other, there are facts. 1, Roswell exists. It is a town in New Mexico. 2, something crashed in Roswell in July of 1947. No one refutes this, even the government. 3, this incident has been covered, researched, researched more than any other potential UFO alien incident in history. And 4, it has bypassed becoming generic and ubiquitous, bypassed becoming a meme, and just really become a Roswell. It should be its own category. It is its own thing. It's something that pretty much everyone knows about now. And that's funny, because you go back a few decades and no one knew about it. Yes, this incident happened in 1947. There was a report, something crashed. Initially it was claimed to be a UFO, which is, again, technically correct. I mean, they didn't know what it was. But then they upped it and said it was a flying saucer. Well, this was quickly retracted. Then they said it was a weather balloon. So we have 2 contradictory reports. Now, what's funny is back then, 1947, people accepted the weather balloon story and went on about their lives. Part of it is they still trusted their government at the time. You don't really hear much about Roswell again through the 50s and 60s. It only really starts to crop up in the late 70s, with the first books on it not written till 1980 or 1981. And it slowly builds steam throughout the 80s. Now, like I said, originally they said a saucer crashed, debris was recovered, then they said it was a weather balloon. Well, in the 70s and early 80s, researchers, I'll use that term out of, to give due respect, I don't want to dismiss anyone, said no, an alien ship definitely crashed outside of Roswell and debris was recovered. Okay, then there was a military cover-up. Next, a few years later, the story got expanded on to say it wasn't just debris, it was an alien ship, more or less intact. But then people said, well, what about the first reports of debris? That was clearly a lot of little pieces spread out over an area. So then it was amended to say, well, actually there were 2 alien ships, perhaps. Okay? So that became the story, the narrative. But by the time you get to the late 80s, it was one ship crashed and broke into a bajillion pieces. Another ship crashed, but was more or less intact, and alien bodies were found in it and recovered. 3 to 4 is usually the report I recall. But they were dead. They were hauled off. And this is about the time the Unsolved Mysteries episode aired, which really gave this national attention. And of course, it was one of the earliest recreations of the event on screen, where the aliens were seen. And this really popularized the gray alien thing. It happened before, but this really put it on national television. Funnily enough, I don't remember that scaring me. I was getting not old at that time, but 8 or 10. The Men in Black, as I said in the UFO video, terrified me, or at least creeped me out. I guess not terrified, but creeped me out. The Roswell thing just interested me. Maybe because it was in the past and I've always liked history, and I couldn't really find something historic frightening. So this goes on. Then the story gets amended to say that actually one of the aliens was alive, and that gets spun off. Then there's also the alien autopsy video, which, okay, I think everyone can agree that was a hoax. There's still a few defenders, but I have to say the evidence against it being real is about as good as it gets, and the evidence to prove it being real is extremely shaky. Then we have some more made-for-TV movies coming out. Again, X-Files plays off Roswell, and then a whole host of TV shows, movies play off Roswell. Obviously, Independence Day was a famous one from the 90s. Now, of course, there was even a series, Roswell. It goes on and on and on and on. And the story keeps getting expounded upon and changed. New witnesses added. New testimony, claimed to be authentic added. But keep in mind, this is all considerably after the fact. This stuff isn't coming out in the late 40s, early 50s, or even late 50s. Most of the stuff isn't materializing to the earliest in the 70s. Before that, we just have the couple of early newspaper reports. And to some extent, they were right. It wasn't a weather balloon. There was a cover-up. The government came out in the 90s and said that it was actually Project Mogul. It was a, secret high-altitude project. And back in the 40s, when it crashed, it was classified. So that it makes sense why they would cover it up. So you know what? The people who smelled bullshit at the time, their sensors were dead on. Something was being covered up. The stories given to explain it in the 40s were not true. Bravo, you ferreted it out. I sincerely applaud them. They picked at a scab, at an old scab, until government documents were declassified and we were given an answer that more or less fits all of the factual evidence from the 40s and 50s. But the one thing it didn't do was give a satisfactory resolution, or at least a sexy one. By this point, you had people that were invested in this thing. They had been convinced for 10, 20 years that aliens crashed there. To be given this answer was pretty anticlimactic, pretty underwhelming. To that end, many say it was another lie, another fabrication. I'm not going to say they're 100% wrong because I don't know. I will say this though. Which is more likely? That the whole Project Mogul thing is the truth? Or that these people had invested so much in this being aliens that they just couldn't let go? Again, I'm not saying one way or the other, but you have to factor in human psychology to this. You have to be objective. Just because you want something to be true, or even fear something to be true, doesn't make it true. And just because an answer seems blah, seems underwhelming, doesn't make it untrue either. It really doesn't. The Project Mogul explanation makes sense, and it fits most of the facts. What doesn't make sense are the Roswell stories. The story has changed and been expounded upon so many times, and so many of the quote-unquote eyewitnesses either changed their stories over time or have been proven not even to be real people. The story keeps changing and getting convoluted. People argue within the ufology community about what's real, what's not real. There's a lot of infighting going on. To the point now that I've even heard some people say that it's absolutely not true, that, just because they're fed up. The fact is, I think the waters have become so muddied, and the evidence is so thin. At this point, 80 years on, if we don't know by now, we probably never will. The eyewitnesses are all passed away now. If there were any secret government documents, they would have turned up by now. Or if the flying saucer were being kept somewhere for study. People have this habit of leaking and whistleblowing. And there have been a few whistleblowers that have come out claiming this and that. But again, what they don't have, they have stories. They're long on stories, but they're short on evidence. And I don't say this because I don't want it to be true. I say this because that's just how the world works. When you make a fantastic claim, you need something to back it up. What if I said my cat Oscar could talk? You probably wouldn't believe me. That's a pretty ludicrous thing to say. But he can. He actually speaks with a Mexican accent, and he originally spoke Spanish. But if I'm making such a claim, I have to back it up, right? You'd want to hear it. You'd want to see it. Why should UFOs or anything else be any different? Why should people just believe other people's claims? And as I said in the UFO video, part of this is we don't trust our government. Nor should we. We should be, in a democracy especially, but any government should be kept under a microscope. Heck, without picking at the Roswell thing, we wouldn't have even heard about Project Mogul. So keep studying, keep digging, keep asking questions. Please do. Please. There's no problem in asking questions. But if you don't like the answers, don't just automatically disregard them. And that's what I'm going to get into my next video about, is about data collection, sources, what's trusted and what's automatically disregarded, and how people's biases play a role. All of us, one way or the other. And that goes for skeptics as believers and blah, blah, blah. It's not exclusive to one side or another. At this point, Roswell is a meme. Or more than a meme. It's also big business. The city of Roswell has annual festivals and sells merchandise. It's become a tourist attraction. Many people in Hollywood have made millions, maybe billions of dollars off the Roswell concept and incident. So don't think for one moment there isn't incentive there to keep it going. Moreover, what incentive would our government have to hide it? Just saying. I'm not saying that they're not. I'm just saying, what would their real incentive be? Well, I think that's enough for this section here. If you could, like, share, and subscribe. Also, feel free to comment below. I'd love to just discuss this in a friendly way, because that's all this is. It's just asking questions and engaging in that. I'm not presenting any answers because I don't have any, unfortunately. I wish I did. However, Oscar does, but we're still working on his English. It's still a bit of a language barrier. Maybe one day he could tell us. If anyone knows on the earth, I think it's the cats. What do you think? This is Misha. And I'll catch you next time.